When your own son tells you that you're not welcome in his home, something inside you breaks in a way that never truly heals. I remember standing on his porch that rainy evening, holding a warm casserole dish I'd made just to surprise him and his family. It was the kind of small thing mothers do without thinking, a gesture of love, a quiet way of saying, "I still care." But when the door opened, the look I received wasn't love. It was distance. It was rejection. Mark stood there, tall and tense, no longer the little boy who used to run into my arms after school. Behind him stood his wife, Lily. Her arms were crossed, and her expression was cold, as if my very presence was an inconvenience. The way she looked at me made me feel like an unwelcome guest in a home I once helped build, a home that used to echo with laughter and warmth. Mark spoke in a tone that felt rehearsed, distant. He said I couldn't just drop by anymore, that it was their home now, their rules. His words hit me harder than the rain that soaked through my coat. I tried to explain, my voice trembling, that I only wanted to see him, to see my grandchildren, to bring a home-cooked meal like I always had. But his eyes didn't soften. He simply said, "You're not welcome here, Mom." And then the door closed. I stood there for a long moment, frozen, the rain pouring down my face, mixing with the tears I couldn't stop. The sound of that door slamming echoed in my heart. That was the moment I realized something deep and painful. The house I once built with love, the place where my memories lived, now belonged to people who saw me as a burden. I was no longer part of their picture, no longer someone they wanted around. I walked back to my car slowly, clutching the casserole that had grown cold in my hands. The streets were quiet, but inside me, everything was loud. The questions, the hurt, the disbelief. How had it come to this? How had the boy I raised with kindness and sacrifice become a man capable of shutting me out like a stranger? As I sat in the car, rain tapping against the windshield, a new feeling began to replace the sorrow. It wasn't anger exactly, it was resolve. They might have turned me away, but they would never erase me. I wouldn't beg for a place in their lives anymore. Instead, I would build a new one, right beside them. One day soon, I would own the house next door, and that day would change everything. My name is Jean Matthews, and I never imagined I'd live to see the day when my own son would turn me away from a home I helped him build. I'm 58 years old now, a retired schoolteacher who spent most of her life working hard, saving every penny, and raising a child alone after my husband passed away. When my husband, Daniel, died in a car accident, Mark was just 10 years old. I still remember the night I told him his father wasn't coming home. He sat on the couch, clutching the small baseball glove his dad had given him for his birthday. His little voice cracked when he said, "It's okay, Mom. I'll take care of you now." That moment broke my heart and healed it at the same time. From that day on, it was just the two of us against the world. Life wasn't easy, but I was determined. I worked double shifts at the local elementary school, teaching during the day and tutoring in the evenings. There were nights when I came home too tired to even eat, but one look at Mark's smile and I knew it was all worth it. He was a bright, kind, and funny little boy. He'd wait for me at the kitchen table, showing me his drawings or telling me about his school day. He used to say, "Mom, when I grow up, I'll buy you a big house so you'll never have to work again." I used to laugh and tell him, "Just promise me you'll stay kind." "Mark, that's all I want." Years passed, and Mark grew into a fine young man. He was intelligent, ambitious, and full of dreams. He got a scholarship to college, but still, I helped with his expenses. I sold my wedding ring once to pay for his textbooks. I told myself Daniel would have wanted it that way. I didn't mind. I was proud. Every time Mark called me, every time he said, "Mom, I couldn't have done this without you," I felt like every sacrifice was worth it. But life has a strange way of testing us when we least expect it. It was during Mark's final year of college when he met Lily. She was beautiful, no doubt about it, tall, elegant, with the kind of charm that could fill a room. She came from a well-off family, the kind that looked perfect on the outside. Her father was a businessman, Her mother ran charity events, and they lived in a big house by the lake. I wanted to be happy for Mark, I really did. Every mother dreams of seeing her son in love. But something about Lily made me uneasy from the very beginning. The first time he brought her home, I could sense the difference. She looked around my small house with polite curiosity, but I could see it in her eyes. Judgment. She complimented everything but meant nothing. "Your home is so cozy," she said with that little smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was sweet to Mark, but with me, her sweetness had edges. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe I was just being sensitive. Maybe I wasn't used to my son growing up, finding someone new to care for. But over time, I began to notice little changes. Mark called less often. When he did, Lily was always in the background, and she had this habit of taking over the conversation. Once, I asked if he could come over for dinner on Sunday. He said, "Mom, Lily's parents invited us to a dinner party. Maybe next week?" Next week never came. When Mark and Lily announced their engagement, I was overjoyed. I hugged him tightly and said, "You've made me so proud." But deep inside, a small part of me worried that I was losing him. Not to life, not to adulthood, but to someone who might not see the love we shared the same way I did. The wedding was grand. Everything Lily's family wanted it to be. It was held at a vineyard outside Charleston. The venue was stunning, filled with crystal chandeliers and golden lights. Everyone looked glamorous. And then there was me, a middle-aged woman in a simple navy blue dress, sitting alone at the corner table. I remember Lily's mother whispering to one of her friends, "Oh, that must be Mark's mother. Such a simple woman, bless her heart." I pretended not to hear, but the words sank deep. When it came time for speeches, I stood up, holding my little note card, and said, "All I ever wanted was for my son to find happiness. I pray this marriage brings him the same love his father and I shared." I looked at Mark, hoping he'd meet my eyes. He smiled, but it wasn't the same smile from his childhood. It was rehearsed, distant, like he was already someone else's husband before being my son. After they got married, they bought a beautiful home, a home I helped make possible. When Mark called me about it, he said, "Mom, we found the perfect house, but we're a bit short on the down payment." I didn't even think twice. I withdrew from my savings, the one I'd been keeping for my retirement, and sent it to him. I told myself it's for his happiness. That's all that matters. For a while, things seemed fine. They moved in, decorated, and sent me pictures. Lily would send me texts, short, polite, almost robotic. "Thank you, John, the money really helped. The house looks wonderful." I told her I'd love to visit and see it. She replied, "Maybe once we've settled in." That maybe turned into months of silence. Eventually, I stopped asking. I didn't want to sound needy, but I still cooked for them sometimes. Casseroles, pies, cookies, and left them at their doorstep when I knew they were out. I just wanted them to know I cared. Then one day, Lily invited me over for dinner. It felt like progress. I dressed nicely, brought a homemade pie, and went with a hopeful heart. The moment I stepped inside, though, I felt out of place. The house was modern, cold, filled with things that looked expensive but empty. Lily talked about her job, her friends, and her parents' new lake house. Mark sat quietly, barely looking at me. When I tried to talk about his childhood memories, our camping trips, the way he used to love homemade soup, Lily interrupted with a laugh. "Oh, Mark doesn't eat that stuff anymore. We're more into healthy food now." Something in her tone made me feel small, like everything I'd done, everything I'd given, suddenly didn't matter. After dinner, as I stood up to leave, Lily said sweetly, "You know, Jean, it's probably best if you call before visiting next time. We've been so busy lately." Her voice was polite, but her eyes weren't. I smiled, nodded, and walked away quietly. That was the beginning of the distance. Calls became fewer, visits became rarer, and when I did call, Lily often answered, saying Mark was busy. On my birthday, they sent me a text. On Christmas, a card with both their names printed, not written. And each time, I felt my son slipping further away. I tried to remind myself that children grow up. that it's normal for them to build their own lives. But deep down, I knew this wasn't about independence. It was about exclusion. Then came the night that broke me. It was raining heavily, and I decided to surprise them with dinner. I cooked Mark's favorite casserole, the one his father used to love, and drove through the storm. When I knocked, I heard voices inside. The door opened, and there he was, my son. But his expression was cold. Behind him stood Lily, her arms crossed. "Mom, we've talked about this," he said flatly. "You can't just show up. This is our home now." I stood there, drenched, holding the dish, confused. "I just wanted to see you. And the kids," I whispered. Lily's voice cut through the air like ice. "She's here again, Mark. Maybe she thinks she still lives here." I looked at her, then at my son. He avoided my eyes. "Mom," he said, "you're not welcome here." "Mom," he said, "you're not welcome here." Those words burned into me. My hands trembled and I almost dropped the dish. I nodded slowly and whispered, "I understand." Then I turned and walked away as the door shut behind me. That night I sat alone in my small living room, the casserole untouched on the table. The silence in my home was unbearable. I looked around at the framed photos, his graduation, his wedding, his childhood smile. I had given him everything. And now I had nothing left but memories. But as I wiped my tears, something inside me changed. I told myself, if they've closed their doors to me, I'll build my own door. One they can never shut again, and that's exactly what I did. After that night, I didn't sleep for days. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still hear Mark's words. "You're not welcome here." They echoed in my head like a cruel whisper I couldn't silence. I kept asking myself what I did wrong. I had raised him alone, loved him unconditionally, and stood by him through every mistake. How could my own son treat me like a stranger? But slowly my grief turned into something stronger. I decided I would no longer beg for a place in anyone's home, not even my own child's. I had spent my entire life giving, and now it was time to give something back to myself. The next morning, I got up early, made myself a cup of tea, and sat by the window. The sun was rising over Charleston, painting the sky gold. For the first time in months, I felt something stir inside me, a quiet determination. I told myself, "Jean, you are not finished. Your story isn't over yet." So I started rebuilding my life piece by piece. I began by returning to the community center where I used to volunteer before Mark got married. The staff welcomed me with warm smiles. "Jean? We missed you," said Helen, the coordinator. She hugged me like an old friend. That simple kindness felt like a breath of fresh air. They needed someone to teach art classes for seniors and children. I agreed right away. I'd always loved painting, even though I hadn't picked up a brush in years. The first day of class, I stood in front of a room full of nervous faces. Some were kids from broken homes, others were retirees looking for company. We started small, mixing colors, drawing simple shapes, but soon laughter filled the room. That place became my new home. My students painted their stories on canvas, and somehow, I painted my healing through theirs. Each stroke helped me breathe again. Every smile reminded me that life wasn't over just because someone had shut a door in my face. One evening, after class, I was cleaning up brushes when Mrs. Turner, one of my senior students, came up to me. She was in her 70s, a quiet widow who rarely spoke. She said softly, "You know, Jean, you have a light about you. Don't let anyone dim it." Those words stayed with me. Weeks turned into months, and though I was slowly healing, a part of me still missed Mark. I wondered if he ever thought about me. Sometimes I'd drive past his neighborhood, not to spy, but just to feel close. I'd park my car down the street, look at his house from afar, and whisper, "I hope you're happy, son." But fate has a strange sense of timing. One morning, I was having coffee when my phone rang. It was my old neighbor, Clara, who lived near Mark's house. Her voice was sharp with gossip. "Jean, you won't believe this," she said. "Your son's house is up for sale." I froze, the cup trembling in my hand. "What do you mean?" I asked. "They put a sign up this morning. Big red letters, for sale. I saw them arguing outside last week. Something's not right, Jean. For a few seconds, I couldn't speak. The house I had helped pay for, the home they said I didn't belong in, was now on the market. It felt strange, sad, but also poetic. That afternoon, I couldn't resist driving by. The familiar street looked the same, lined with tidy lawns and maple trees. But when I reached their house, I saw the sign, for sale by owner. My heart sank. In the driveway, Mark and Lily stood arguing, their voices sharp and tired. I stayed in my car, windows rolled up, watching quietly. "Mark, we can't afford this anymore," Lily snapped, her voice filled with frustration. "Your job barely covers the bills, and my parents can't keep bailing us out." Mark ran his hands through his hair. "I told you, Lily, I'll find another way. Just give me time." "Time?" She laughed bitterly. "You've had time, Mark. Maybe you should ask your mother for help again." "Oh, wait, she's too busy feeling sorry for herself." Her words hit me like a stone. I watched as my son turned away, his shoulders slumped. He looked defeated, nothing like the proud, confident man he once was. I sat there for a long time, thinking. The woman who once made me feel small was now drowning in her own pride. The man who once turned me away was now struggling to keep his life together. And somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered, "Don't interfere. Not yet." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything. That house used to hold laughter, love, and dreams. Now it was just bricks and bitterness. The next morning, I woke up with a strange idea in my head. At first, I brushed it off, thinking it was silly. But it kept coming back. What if I bought the house next door? The thought made me laugh at first. Why would I want to live near people who hurt me? But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I wasn't planning to chase them or punish them. No, I just wanted to reclaim my peace. I wanted to show that I wasn't broken. So, I called a real estate agent the next day, a kind man named Peter Collins. We met at a small cafe downtown. He was polite and professional with kind eyes that reminded me of my late husband. "Miss Matthews," he said, glancing at the papers. "You're interested in the house on Willow Lane?" "Yes," I said, trying to sound calm. "The one right next to my son's old home." He raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. Any particular reason?" I smiled faintly. "Let's just say, it feels familiar." Within a week, we toured the property. It was lovely. 2 bedrooms, a small garden, a sunny porch. It needed a little work, but it had charm. I could already imagine myself there, drinking tea, painting by the window, living quietly. "I'll take it," I told Peter. He blinked. "That quickly?" "Yes, but please keep my name private until everything's finalized." He nodded. "Understood." A month later, it was official. I had bought the house next door to my son, quietly, discreetly, without anyone knowing. The first time I held the keys in my hand, I felt a rush of power and peace all at once. Not power to hurt anyone, power to stand tall again. Moving day was emotional. I packed my things from the small apartment I had been renting and drove down Willow Lane. When I parked in front of my new home, I noticed Mark's car still in the driveway. The for sale sign was gone, but the house looked cold, lifeless. Curtains drawn, grass uncut, like joy had left. I didn't go to their door. I just smiled, unlocked mine, and stepped inside. The house smelled like fresh paint and new beginnings. I remember standing in the living room whispering to myself, "You're home now, Jean." Over the next few weeks, I settled in quietly. I planted flowers in the garden, roses just like the ones Daniel used to love. I repainted the porch, hung wind chimes, and baked cookies for the neighbors. Soon, people in the street began to stop by. They'd say things like, "You're such a lovely addition to the neighborhood, and your garden looks beautiful." Their kindness reminded me that not everyone closes their doors, and that's when Lily noticed me. It was a Saturday morning. I was trimming the roses when I saw her peek through the curtains next door. She froze when our eyes met. For a second, I thought she'd come say hello. Instead, she yanked the curtain shut. A few days later, I heard raised voices again. This time, it wasn't money. It was me. I could hear Lily yelling, Why is she here, Mark? Why did she move next door? Did she do this to spite me? Mark mumbled something I couldn't hear, but I smiled to myself. It wasn't spite. It was peace, and she couldn't stand it. Eventually, she couldn't hold back. One morning, she marched across the lawn and stood in front of my porch. Her arms were crossed, her lips tight. "What are you doing here, Jean?" she snapped. "Why buy this house of all places?" I looked at her calmly. "Because I liked it. It felt right," she scoffed. "You're unbelievable. You just can't let go, can you? You had to be close to Mark to keep interfering." I shook my head gently. "No, dear. I didn't buy this to interfere. I bought it to remind myself that I belong, even when others try to erase me." Her face turned red with anger. "You're pathetic," she hissed. I smiled faintly. "If peace is pathetic, then I suppose I am." She stormed off, slamming her door so hard the windows rattled. After that, she stopped speaking to me, but I could feel her watching. Whenever I hosted my weekend art classes in the garden, she'd peek from behind the curtains. The laughter from my students carried across the fence, and I knew it bothered her, not because of noise, but because of joy. The neighborhood began to notice the difference. My home became warm and welcoming. Her home became silent and cold. People stopped by to chat, kids waved when they passed. Lily's perfect world was crumbling, and mine was finally blooming again. It's funny how life works. The woman who once made me feel invisible was now the one living in my shadow, and I didn't even lift a finger. One living in my shadow, and I didn't even lift a finger. After weeks of crying myself to sleep, something inside me finally changed. The tears stopped one night, and in their place, a strange calm took over. It wasn't anger anymore. It was determination. I looked around my small rental and realized I'd spent my whole life giving. Giving love, time, forgiveness, and money. And what did I get in return? A door slammed in my face by the very person I raised. No. This time, I wouldn't just sit back and suffer. I'd make sure my son truly understood what he'd done. The idea didn't come overnight. It started small, a thought, a whisper in the back of my mind that grew louder every day. I wanted to rebuild my life, but part of me also wanted to reclaim my dignity. My son, Daniel, had moved into that new, fancy suburban house with his wife, Emily, a place that symbolized their success and independence. They thought they were above me. They thought they could live without me. But fate, I realized, has a wicked sense of humor. One morning, I saw a for sale sign pop up right next to their house. The identical property, same style, same yard. My heart skipped. It felt almost like destiny. I called the realtor, just curious at first. But when she told me it had been on the market for 3 months and the owners were desperate to sell, something inside me clicked. I still had savings. From my husband's life insurance, some retirement money, and a small investment I'd made years ago. It wouldn't be easy, but it was possible. That night, I barely slept. I sat by the window, staring at the glow of Daniel's living room across the fence. I saw silhouettes, them laughing, clinking glasses, their little perfect family picture. My eyes burned, not from sadness this time, but from resolve. I whispered to myself, "You said I wasn't welcome in your home, Daniel. Fine. Then I'll build my life right next door." The next morning, I called the realtor again. Her name was Mrs. Fisher, an older woman with a soft, persuasive voice. She told me the owners had already dropped the price twice. "If you're serious, John," she said, "you could probably get a very good deal." My hands trembled as I agreed to meet her. When I stepped into that empty house, I felt something powerful. The air smelled of dust and new beginnings. The rooms were sunlit, the floors polished, and from the upstairs window, I could see straight into my son's backyard. "Would you like to make an offer, Mrs. Fisher asked. I nodded. "Yes, I'll buy it." It took weeks of paperwork and careful planning, but I kept it quiet. I didn't tell anyone, not my friends, not even my sister. The moment I signed those final documents, something inside me healed. I wasn't buying a house. I was reclaiming control over my life. When the moving trucks pulled in, I could almost imagine the look on Daniel and Emily's faces. I didn't tell them who bought the property. I wanted that moment to be perfect. I decorated the house with warmth and care. Bright curtains, family photos, fresh flowers. Every little thing felt like stitching up old wounds. A few days later, Daniel noticed. I was on the porch, watering the plants when his car pulled up. He stepped out, stunned, frozen in disbelief. "Mom, what are you doing here?" he said, his voice a mix of shock and discomfort. I smiled, calm and steady. "Oh, didn't you hear? I bought the place next door." Emily came out next, her face pale. She forced a smile. "That's unexpected." "Yes," I said softly. "Life's full of surprises." For weeks they avoided me. They pretended I wasn't there. But the irony wasn't lost on me. Every time they looked out their window, they saw me, the mother they'd pushed away, now living her best life just meters away. I began to find joy again. I joined a local book club, hosted garden teas, and started volunteering at a nearby shelter. Slowly, people in the neighborhood began visiting my house more than theirs. I became known as the friendly lady next door. The most beautiful twist? Emily's mother, the same woman who'd whispered poison into my son's ear, moved abroad for her job. Without her constant interference, cracks began to show in Daniel and Emily's marriage. I didn't celebrate it, but I won't lie. There was a sense of poetic balance. Life was setting things right in its own quiet way. One evening, Daniel came home late, tired and angry. I could hear the shouting from my window, muffled words, accusations. Emily slammed the door and left. A few days later, Daniel came over. He didn't knock right away. He stood there for a long moment before finally tapping on my door. I opened it, pretending to be surprised. "Daniel?" He looked exhausted. "Mom, can we talk?" I gestured for him to come in. He sat at my kitchen table, looking around the cozy space. "You've made this place nice," he muttered. "Thank you," I said gently. There was silence, then he sighed. "I don't know why I treated you that way. I thought Emily was right, that we needed space, that you were overstepping. But now, I just feel empty." I looked at him carefully. "You said I wasn't welcome in your home, Daniel, and I listened. But now, you're in mine." He looked down, shame coloring his face. "I'm sorry, Mom." And for the first time, I believed he meant it. But I wasn't finished yet. The true revenge wasn't just about being neighbors. It was about showing him who I had become. Over the next few months, I thrived. I renovated the house, started a small home-based baking business, and people loved it. My house became the heart of the neighborhood. Laughter, music, and kindness flowed freely. Meanwhile, Daniel's life seemed to unravel. The house next door, once full of pride, now looked dull and quiet. He'd often come over, helping with repairs, joining my dinners, trying to rebuild the bond. And while I forgave him slowly, I never let him forget the lesson. Rejection can turn into resilience if you let it. My revenge wasn't cruel. It was graceful, quiet, and powerful. Every day I lived happily next door was a reminder to my son that love cannot be shut out, and that the mother he cast away was stronger than he ever imagined. By the time Emily moved out permanently, Daniel had learned the hardest truth of all. Pride destroys, but humility rebuilds. And me? I finally had peace. Not just because I owned the house next door, but because I owned my life again. The night. Everything changed was quiet, the kind of silence that makes you feel the weight of your own heartbeat. I was sitting on my porch, a cup of tea warming my hands, when I noticed Daniel's house lights flicker off, one by one. His home looked dim, lonely. Nothing like the grand place he once bragged about. The house that once felt like a kingdom now looked more like a hollow shell. I sat there for a while, remembering the day he told me I wasn't welcome. The coldness in his eyes, the way he turned away from me like I was nothing. But tonight, the air felt different. I could sense something was about to shift. It was around 10 p.m. when I heard a soft knock on my door. I opened it, and there he was, my son, Daniel. His eyes were red and his face looked drained, older somehow. He wasn't wearing his usual confident smirk. Instead, he looked lost. His voice cracked. When he said, "Mom, can I come in?" I stepped aside without a word. He walked in slowly, glancing around the living room like it was his first time seeing it. The smell of fresh bread filled the air. The fireplace was lit, casting a golden glow across the room. It felt warm, the kind of warmth he'd been missing for months. He sat down at the kitchen table, the same place where he'd once refused to share a meal with me. For a long time, he didn't say anything. Just sat there, staring at his hands. Finally, he whispered. Emily left. She took the kids to her mother's. I stayed quiet. He kept talking. She said I've changed, that I'm cold, that I don't understand love, and maybe she's right. I don't know how to love anymore. He looked up at me then, tears in his eyes. I thought pushing you away would make me a better husband, a stronger man, but it only made me smaller, empty, and now the house feels like a prison. Hearing those words, something inside me cracked, not with anger, but with sadness. I'd dreamed of this moment for so long, but standing there, seeing him broken, I didn't feel victory. I felt heartbreak, because revenge had never really been the goal. It was healing. And maybe now, he was finally ready to face what he'd done. Daniel, I said softly, sitting across from him, I never wanted to take anything from you. I never wanted to compete. I just wanted to be your mother. He wiped his eyes, shaking his head. I know. I was stupid, Mom. I let Emily convince me you were controlling, that you were trying to interfere, but you were just loving me in the only way you knew how. I nodded slowly. Yes, I wanted to help, but you didn't need my money or my advice. You needed my love. You always did. And I was right here, waiting. He looked around the cozy room again, tears streaming freely now. You've made this house feel like a home. I forgot what that even feels like. I took a deep breath and finally said the words I'd been holding inside for months. Do you remember what you said to me, Daniel? The day you told me I wasn't welcome in your home? He froze, guilt flashing across his face. Yes, he whispered, I remember every word. I leaned back, my voice calm and steady. That day, I walked away with my heart shattered. But then I realized, if I wasn't welcome in your home, I would build one where I was. I bought the house next door, not to spy on you or make you miserable, but to remind myself that rejection doesn't define me. Love does. He buried his face in his hands. Mom, I'm so sorry. I was blinded by pride. I thought success meant cutting you off, proving I could stand on my own. But I lost everything that truly mattered. I reached across the table and touched his hand. Then start again, Daniel. Not as the man who rejected his mother, but as the son who finally understood her. He nodded slowly, the weight of his choices written all over his face. I don't deserve your forgiveness? Maybe not, I said gently, but I'm giving it anyway. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the crackling fire. Then, to my surprise, Daniel stood and walked to the window. He looked out toward his dark, empty house. It doesn't feel like home anymore, he said quietly. It hasn't for a long time. I joined him by the window. Homes aren't built with walls, Daniel. They're built with love, forgiveness, and people who care. You can rebuild yours, if you learn from this. He turned to me, eyes filled with gratitude and shame. Can I stay for a while? Just until I figure things out? I hesitated. The old me would have said yes instantly, but I wanted him to understand boundaries, responsibility, and growth. You can visit, I said finally. But you need to fix what's broken in your own house. You need to face what you ran from. He nodded, understanding. You're right, but can we have dinner together tomorrow? I smiled, tears blurring my vision. I'd like that very much. That night, after he left, I sat by the window again, staring at his house. For the first time in a long while, it didn't make me sad. It reminded me how far I'd come. I didn't buy that house next door for revenge anymore. It was my reminder that strength can come from heartbreak. The next evening, Daniel returned, carrying groceries. I thought I'd make dinner this time, he said, smiling shyly. We cooked together, something we hadn't done since he was a teenager. The kitchen filled with laughter and warmth. He burned the bread twice, spilled the sauce, and kept apologizing, but I didn't care. The house felt alive again. As we sat down to eat, Daniel looked at me seriously. Mom, I know I can't undo the past, but I promise you, I'll never make you feel unwanted again. I smiled through tears. That's all I ever wanted to hear. Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of children playing in the distance. Life went on, steady and calm. And as I looked around my cozy little home, I realized something powerful. The revenge had already served its purpose. I didn't need to destroy anyone to feel strong. I just needed to rebuild myself, piece by piece, until I no longer felt broken. When Daniel stood to leave, he paused at the door. You know, Mom, he said softly, the house next door never looked so beautiful until you moved in. I chuckled. That's because love lives here now, Daniel. And you're always welcome, as long as you remember what that word means. He nodded, his eyes glistening. I'll never forget again. As he walked back home under the golden streetlights, I whispered to myself, I bought the house next door. But what I really found was myself, and for the first time in years, my heart felt full. The days that followed were quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, but peaceful. I woke up every morning with sunlight streaming through my curtains, birds singing outside, and the smell of freshly brewed tea filling the air. For the first time in years, I felt truly content. I didn't have to chase anyone's approval or beg for a place in someone else's world. I had created my own. Daniel started visiting often. At first, he would come just to share a cup of coffee or ask about an old recipe. But gradually, his visits became longer. Sometimes he'd bring the kids along. The first time they came, they ran through my garden, laughing and shouting, their little hands touching everything with curiosity. It was beautiful, like seeing the future heal what the past had broken. One afternoon, as I watched my grandson, Oliver, chase butterflies, Daniel came up beside me. Mom, he said softly, thank you for not giving up on me. I looked at him, my son, older, humbler, softer. I never stopped loving you, Daniel. I just had to learn to love myself too. He smiled sadly. I guess I had to lose everything to understand that. I nodded. Sometimes life teaches us the hard way, but that's how we grow. After that, he began helping me fix small things around the house. A squeaky door, a loose shelf, a broken garden gate. It reminded me of when he was a boy, always eager to help his father with repairs. There were moments when we'd both stop and share a look, the kind that said everything words couldn't. Regret, forgiveness, love, and a silent promise not to repeat the same mistakes. Over time, the bitterness between us dissolved. Emily eventually returned, quieter than before, humbled by her own lessons. I welcomed her politely. I wasn't vengeful. I'd outgrown the need to prove anything. She apologized for everything, the manipulation, the harsh words, the years she stole from me. I accepted it, not because she deserved it, but because I deserved peace. Life slowly fell into rhythm again. My little baking business grew. Neighbors loved my pies and muffins. On weekends, I'd host small tea gatherings and laughter would fill the air again. Daniel's children adored coming over. My home had become their second playground. The house that once stood as a symbol of pain had transformed into a haven of joy. Sometimes I would sit in my garden at sunset, staring at the house next door. Daniel's house. It no longer looked cold or unwelcoming. I'd see lights glowing through the windows, hear the sound of music or laughter, and smile. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoration. And in those moments, I'd think back to the night I signed the papers for this home. I remembered how broken I felt, how lost and unwanted. If someone had told me then that this house would one day be the place where healing began, I might not have believed them. But that's the thing about life. Sometimes the places we move to out of pain become the places where love returns. One evening, as we all sat together for dinner, me, Daniel, Emily, and the kids, Daniel raised a glass of juice and said, "To Mom, who taught me that family isn't about perfection. It's about forgiveness," everyone clapped. My heart swelled. I didn't say much. I just looked around that table at the faces that had once turned away from me and felt gratitude. After they left that night, I stood by my window, watching Daniel walk his kids home, holding their tiny hands. The porch light from his house glowed warmly, casting long shadows on the ground. For a moment I closed my eyes and whispered a small prayer of thanks. Not for revenge, but for redemption. As I turned off the lights and headed to bed, I realized something profound. Revenge doesn't always have to destroy. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply living well. It's finding happiness where others expected you to break. It's turning your wounds into wisdom, and in that peace, I finally understood what it means to forgive without forgetting, to move forward without bitterness, to let time do its quiet work of healing. Weeks later, Daniel came over again, this time with a small box. He smiled shyly as he handed it to me. "Open it," he said. Inside was a framed photo. Me, him, and the kids, taken during one of our garden lunches. At the bottom he'd written, "Home is where Mom is." Tears filled my eyes as I hugged him. "Thank you, Daniel," he whispered. "No, Mom. Thank you for buying the house next door." That line stayed with me for days. Because yes, I had bought the house next door, but what I truly gained was far greater than any property or payback. I gained peace, purpose, and the love of a son who had finally found his way back home. Now, whenever I see someone struggling with rejection, I tell them this: don't let the door that closed define your worth. Sometimes, when life shuts you out, it's because you're meant to build your own doorway. If my story has taught you anything, I hope it's this. Forgiveness doesn't make you weak. It sets you free. You can rise above betrayal. You can find strength in your solitude. And one day, the same people who turned their backs on you might come looking for the light you refuse to let go out. As I end my story, I want to thank you, yes, you, listening right now, for staying with me through every tear, every lesson, every moment of quiet victory. And if this story touched your heart, if it made you reflect on your own family, your own strength, or your own healing, then don't forget to subscribe to my channel, Jean Stories, because here, we share stories that remind us that even in heartbreak, there is hope. Even in betrayal, there is power. And even when the world says you're not welcome, you can still build a home, right next door to where it all began. So stay kind, stay strong, and never stop believing in your own worth. This is Jean, and this was my story. And this was my story.